So they said, the great old ones who lived ages before there were any men, and who came to the young world at least.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 18 of the Great Old Ones Gaming Podcast. I am your host, Nate, lost in time and space.
I am the man from Ling, host of the Whisper in Darkness YouTube channel.
I am Innkeeper Vasoden from the Twisted Tentacle Inn.
And this is Nathan, Jester of the Abyss. I know you hate that title, so I'm going to keep using it.
I feel like it's been a while. What you guys been up to lately?
Man from Ling.
I have been busy recording episodes, busy playing the Investigator starter decks for some videos I'm going to make about them. They had the parallel Skids, the Into Deep announcement, and then they dropped Glory on us by surprise on Thursday, so it's been busy.
I just want to say for the record, whenever Man from Ling starts talking, I feel like I should be in like a smoking jacket with like a fireplace and a brandy, just like chilling the hell out. I swear, you could have been a DJ.
I was a DJ.
Well, then I rest my case very comfortably. You could be a DJ again, smooth sounds from the Prancing Pony. And in the background, you just hear like people dance on the table and getting all shit-faced.
Yeah, oh, man. I feel lately like FFG has just been shoving content down our throats after like a 3-month drought. We've just been suffocated by it. Ugh.
Yeah.
Even someone like me who's been like unemployed, I still haven't played Skids. I have played a lot of the starter decks though.
Yeah, it is a lot after a 3-month break, but I would rather they have a lot than none at all. See,
I kind of personally feel like I'd rather just go back to a regular schedule where they just release a product once a month.
Yeah, Nate, can I talk to you here for just a sec?
I'm just saying, like...
You never say that again. Do you hear me?
It just feels like... Okay, so let me just state my case here. Like, I feel like it doesn't give their products enough room to breathe. You know, like, Return to TFA came out, like, in the middle of August, and then 2 weeks later, the Investigator starter decks came out. And then 2 weeks after that, they're already talking about Arkham, and they've already talked about another Investigator and another parallel Investigator. It's like, oh my god, there's so much to do.
I totally agree with you. It feels like it's just too fast. You know, like you said, Return to the Forgotten Age comes out, and there was a little hype, but no one's talking about it right now. And it came out less than a month ago, and it's just because there's so many things that have come since. It just feels like way too much, too fast, and like you said, it muddies it up. So Investigator decks there was hype, and then Gloria was announced. So now it's like the hype for the Investigator decks is off to the wayside. It's just weird.
As much as I kind of agree with you, I'm a content whore. I just want as much as possible, and I'll get to it eventually. But I'm the same way with all the fan-made stuff. I mean, I've got 57 fan-made scenarios cut out, ready to go. So I get to those when I can. Nate, what have you been up to?
Yeah, I've just been still on the eternal job hunt for the time being. I've been streaming 3 to 4 times a week on our Twitch channel, playing mostly Arkham, but I have been delving into Darkest Dungeon quite a bit recently, which is a ton of fun. Let's see what else. Vase and I started recently putting up Delta Green scenario reviews, and we've recorded a couple, and one is already live. We did PX Poker Night, which is a operation that sees the agents play the role of Air Force personnel at Platt Air Force Base, and that's live as of the recording of this episode. And then we have another couple of episodes in the pipeline, along with a playthrough that we did of Observer Effect. Vase, why don't you go ahead and kind of briefly discuss Observer Effect?
Probably my favorite Delta Green scenario is Observer Effect, because it's so different. I'm not going to give away any spoilers for it, but yeah, it was us and 2 patrons, and we recorded the first part. It ended up being way longer than expected. It was like 3 hours for the first part. So I think are you going to cut that up into 2 episodes?
We'll see.
And then the second part is probably going to be about as long. So it ended up being a lot longer than I expected. But yeah, lots of fun. Delta Green is really cool because you can have a really action-packed scenario like we did with Ex Oblivione And then you can also have one that's just really mysterious and strange things happening, very science-based, very investigation-based. So, it's cool how the game can take you in different directions and still be interesting for both different, aspects of the gameplay. So that was really cool. And the other scenario that we recently reviewed, that's going up soon, you said, right? Like in a week or two. Yeah, that was an interesting one. So can't wait to get that one out there for you guys. And we have a few in the pipeline that we'll be reviewing as well. So this is probably going to be a regular thing for us, is reviewing these Delta Green scenarios.
Are they fairly prolific?
Yeah, there's a ton of scenarios. And what's interesting is that they're mostly made by the people from Delta Green. They don't really do a lot of third-party content for scenarios. I mean, there are fan-made scenarios, but you don't see them online that much because the ones made by officially Delta Green scenarios are so good. And that's how they keep them with such high quality, because they're very kind of protective of their property when it comes to making a scenario and announcing it as official. They want to make sure it's a certain level of quality in order for them to put their seal of approval on it. Unlike other games like, Call of Cthulhu has a lot of third-party content, and some are better than others by a long shot. And, Dungeons & Dragons, same thing. There's some that are officially Wizards of the Coast endorsed, and they're pretty bad, and there's some that are really good. So with Delta Green, I feel like that the bar is so much higher, and even the lowest or worst scenario is still way better than your average RPG scenario.
Yeah, I think part of it is just the nature of Delta Green as a role-playing game, right? Because it's the stories are so military-based that you have to have a lot of research done into them in the first place. Whereas, I feel like with D&D and Call of Cthulhu to a lesser extent, that you can kind of just have a series of events and you don't really need much background. Obviously it helps, but you can kind of make them more personal dramas, whereas Delta Green is so rooted in its military origins that it's hard to make the scenarios believable otherwise.
That's true. I mean, even the ones that are not military based are very well researched. Like Observer Effect, it's got a hollow beam array and a lot of the intricate details regarding how it works and all that. Clearly they've done their research about how these things function. So it feels so much more realistic. And, I've said before, I have a degree in forensic investigations, and their forensic investigation procedures that are outlined and detailed in the scenarios where agents have to do that kind of thing also are very accurate and well done and clearly well researched. They have, Dennis Detwiller told us that they have a lot of people that are experts in those fields that they can talk to as kind of consultants. And they're very fortunate to have that because they really do put a lot of effort into making sure that these scenarios feel real and are accurate to the specific field that the scenario encompasses. So yeah, it's, I think there are quite a few that are coming out in the future. Dennis posts a lot of updates on his Patreon of little pieces, tidbits, artwork for scenarios that are coming up. And so I know for a fact there are a ton of them that are coming out in the next several months. So it'll be great to review them and give people our thoughts on those as well.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited for Impossible Landscapes, the King in Yellow campaign for Delta Green.
Oh yeah, dude, that's some of the artwork that he shared on that, and a little bit of the teaser text from some of the pages in the book. My God, that campaign is going to be just mind-blowing.
But aside from Delta Green content, we also recruited your brother Gio to act as a writer for the website. Vase, why don't you kind of go ahead and briefly describe what Gio's been up to? Because he has created quite a bit of content, even just in the past few weeks.
Yeah, my brother has a minor in English and literature, and he's written 9 books that he sells on Amazon. And some are like self-help books, but a lot of fiction as well. And he's a horror aficionado like I am. And, we it just seemed right to get him on board for the website. So he's been writing reviews. He's also a big comic book fan. So he's been writing a lot of reviews for different Lovecraftian comic books. And he will be writing reviews for books as well, and movies and shows that have to do with Lovecraft. He's also just written a few articles already that are not related to books, but they're just general topics that are related to what we do here. And he even does some short stories. So I'm going to be posting a few of his short stories that he's written or that he'll be writing for us. I'll be posting them throughout the next few weeks as well. So expect a lot more content, written content on our website, especially articles and reviews and things like that. And most of it is going to be from Geo, and hopefully other people that want to contribute to the website. And if anyone who's listening wants to contribute an article, they can certainly do so. You can contact us at carolinefriendthebotanist@gmail.com, or you can go on our Discord and speak with us, and we can talk about it.
Yeah, so aside from plugging in all of our recent content updates, Nathan, what you've been up to? I know you've been busy at the store.
Oh, I didn't know if you'd circle back around. I think that Delta Green concept you're doing is cool, and I do appreciate very much Vase, your brother, helping out. I did not know about his books. Now I got to check them out and see what self-help books he can help me with. I have been, of course, selling games. Kingdom Death Monsters, having the Gambler's Box, Gambler's Chest, finally release here in the next 4 to 5 months. I did just play 2 great games, one with a friend, Clank Legacy, and I've been playing the solo game Nemo's War, where you play Captain Nemo and you are sinking ships to the bottom of the various oceans and finding treasure. Really fun game as well.
That sounds really cool.
It's amazing. And then as far as Arkham itself, I've caught up with getting all the packs, all the boxes. I've been keeping up with all the fan-made stuff. Just printed off Dead of Winter fan-made scenario. And fun fact for ArkhamCentral.com, if you haven't been there, it's a great source of fan-made material. I'm going to soon be working with people to get fan-made investigators collected and up on our site. Just so once again, if you do want to try out some off-the-cuff stuff and things that people have made, you can do so. So a lot of fun things in the works.
Well, before we get into our main topics, our Patreon has had quite a boom recently. So thanks to everyone that's contributed on that front, especially in these uncertain times. And our patron shout out for this episode is John Lowe, otherwise known as Sub-Zero, if I remember correctly, from Discord. Forgive me if that's totally wrong. But yeah, just wanted to shout out our patrons. If you want to become a patron, you can head over to patreon.com/thegreatoldOnesgaming, where we have various rewards. We give early access to these episodes to our patrons, along with other special content. Okay, so there has been quite a bit of content for the Arkham LCG recently. Where do we even begin? Do we want to start with Return to TFA? Do we want to start with the Investigator starter decks? Do we want to start with
Return to TFA? Well, let's cover that real quick.
Okay. So I think I'm the only one that's actually played through the entire campaign. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've watched it with you and also JP from Northern Lights of Arkham. He's been playing through it with his custom investigator. It looks like the explore mechanic, especially in the first scenario, and the Heart of the Elders, it looks like the explore mechanics definitely been improved tremendously. The supplies seem really well done. I think they made a nice little adjustment to make them more impactful in the scenarios. Overall, I'm glad they didn't up the difficulty too much on most of the scenarios. I don't know that the third one, shoot, what is it called again?
Threads of Fate?
Threads of Fate. God, my memory's terrible. Getting old sucks. So Threads of Fate, I don't know that it needed any changes. I wish they would have saved the cards that they added to that. You know, there's like a couple of extra acts in Threads of Fate. I wish they would have saved those to do some more adjustments for like Boundary Beyond and Heart of the Elders. I'm glad they didn't touch the descent one. How far can you go one?
Depths of Yoth.
God.
Man, you really are bad with
It's
the memory
early
of
in the
this.
morning too. I think that also affects me. So Depths of Yoth. I'm glad they didn't change that one too much. I think they added like 2 or 3 encounter cards, and that was it. So
I think it's literally just one encounter card that gets put into the Explore deck.
yeah,
But yeah.
which is great because that scenario was already pretty much for what it was, perfect for what it was. So it didn't need any more adjustments. So I'm glad they didn't touch that too much. I wish they would have adjusted Jesus Christ the Yethin one,
City of
City
Archives?
of Archives. Jesus, I can't remember any of this.
Man, this is why I crush you in trivia.
I know,
man.
right? No, I always win in trivia. It's just that Nathan cheats. But
How am I cheating? I don't control Venmo.
yeah, City of Archives. I wish they would have done a couple more things with it too. So I mean, overall, I think it was all really positive changes. It's probably the best return to that they've put out so far. I haven't played it myself, but watching 2 different campaigns run through it, definitely liked a lot of the changes. I think there were very few things that were changed for the negative. Heart of the Elder, specifically the new options, not having to replay it a gazillion times. That's really nice that they did that. They listened to the fans. But Heart of the Elders could have used some more tweaks. I wish they would have just gone a little bit deeper into tweaking some of those. But overall, very positive.
I definitely agree with you on Heart of the Elders. I think if they had just spent a little more time retweaking those 2 scenarios, it might have been a little better. I still don't really like the whole you can skip part 1 aspect to it, depending on how well you do in Boundary. I still hate Padme. I don't really care for TFA's reliance on boss enemies having both retaliate and alert, as it kind of really limits your options as a player. But aside from that, I think a lot of the changes, like you said, were pretty solid. I actually really liked the additional active deck in Threads of Fate, and you do get an additional reward for it as well. I think that was pretty interesting. And the changes to the way the supplies work was pretty cool. And they added some extra supplies, and there was some slight changes to Turn Back Time, the epilogue scenario, that tries to make it easier, but in my experience, it was still very difficult. So when I played through Return to TFA, I used Ursula, and I didn't have a good way of dealing damage to enemies, and the campaign kind of promotes that style of gameplay, and then you get to Turn Back Time and you have to spoilers, you have to kill Yig. But what are your guys' thoughts, man, from Lang and Nathan?
I haven't had a chance to play it yet. I've looked at the changes, and from what I was particularly interested in what they did with Heart of the Elders. I appreciate them giving players an out. I'm not too sure whether it's not having played it yet, I'm not sure whether it's enough or how it impacts the larger campaign if you decide to take the out. But we'll see. But I do sort of like what they did with the Explore deck, rather than start with the treacheries in the deck. The treacheries are added as you go, so it gets progressively harder to explore, rather than being somewhat difficult to explore and then getting easier.
Yeah, I liked that change a lot too. It feels much better as a solo player too.
Yeah, I know in some of the scenarios, like I think the Doom of Estley in particular, that scenario always feels to me like you can spend a lot of time spinning your wheels at the entrance until you sort of chew through all those treacheries, and then you make your progress later, and then things sort of speed up as the scenario goes on. So I'll be interested to see how that changes the dynamic, where you make more progress early and then sort of slow down in the middle. But
I think what's interesting about those changes in particular is that it really changes what supplies you take early on. Like the map, I feel like the map and the torch particularly lose a lot of value.
Yeah.
Because usually you're taking those two supplies to kind of quell the treacheries in the explore deck, but since you're adding those as you go on, it feels like you're hampering the use of those supplies a little bit.
Well, I think it probably changes when you use them. I think you can now use them from any location as well. So that changes it significantly. But I know, like, I tended not to, I've played those scenarios a lot without taking the map and the torch. And that's probably why it feels slower at the beginning than some players. But I think you spend a lot of actions at the beginning trying to rig the explore deck so it's favorable rather than exploring and then maybe rigging the deck later as the treacheries are added. Because I know it's quite easy in some of those scenarios just to sit at the entrance and use the torch and the map to try to get a favorable encounter deck. So you spend a lot of time sitting around.
Yeah, that's true. I just like in general that it makes the other supplies feel more useful.
Also, the treacheries aren't as bad if they're coming out later, because generally, if you're trying to explore early in the scenario to get ahead, you may have a couple of things that'll help you deal with the treacheries, but later in the game, generally you have more things on the board that can help you deal with treacheries. So having a higher chance of drawing treacheries later makes it easier, I think, to deal with, because generally you'll have ways to deal with them versus early in the game.
Yeah, like getting an overgrowth on the expedition camp just is rage inducing versus like getting it later on it feels like it's much more manageable, even though it may not be.
Yeah. Or like Heart of the Elders, where, in the non-return version, if you're playing solo, like you start in the one location and you have to explore. And in that explore deck, there's only one location that connects to that. So having all the treacheries in there is a pretty good chance you're drawing 2-3 treacheries before you successfully explore. I had a game where I drew pretty much every treachery. It was for the League of Extraordinary Investigators. I literally was in that starting location the entire time because I drew every single treachery trying to explore before I finally got the connecting location, that's also pretty rage inducing as well.
So I'm just glad they didn't add a Jello pit to the Depths of Yoth, because then the next time I do an event, I'm not going to have to get minor helmets and Jello for the Depths of Yoth challenge. That's just an aside. I'm not going to say it out loud because I don't want to throw people off. Overall, I like what I've seen, and I agree for the most part with what people are saying. The skipping the first part of the Heart of Elders, I believe, is a weird thing, but hey, carnivorous plants suck. Overall, though, I'm pretty happy with the fact that they tried to. This of all the Return Tos, I think, has a very distinct purpose, and that was to try and get additional content for people who have played the game, obviously, so they could enjoy the Forgotten Age even more. But then it also had the dual difficulty, I think, of getting people that didn't like the Forgotten Age to enjoy it. So, I want to talk to more customers. I want to talk to more of our patrons who didn't like it as much and see how that impacted them. But I haven't had a chance to play through them all yet. But I'm looking forward to it, especially once we can get out there and play with more people, eventually. So
that's a good point that you make about how the intention of the design has to kind of cater both to the people that already liked the Forgotten Age and the people that didn't like the Forgotten Age. And I think this Return to box definitely finds a nice middle ground between the two. I think the changes to the explore mechanic in those scenarios works out really well. And there's enough new stuff in the Return to box that actually makes you feel compelled to play it. And like versus like Return to Dunwich, which just kind of fixes one or two scenarios and then changes some of the encounter cards. I feel like Return to TFA really drastically changes the very nature of the campaign itself, which I think is really cool.
The only thing I'm sure, Nathan, that you're upset about is they didn't include the blowgun.
Oh, we're not talking about that.
I know, they added a new ally asset, but they don't add a blowgun. I was also pretty deeply offended.
Well, I thought Vase would be psyched about the botanist.
Someone mentioned it on Discord, and I was like, yes.
But it's not Carolyn Fern, so...
No, but still, maybe she works with her.
Maybe, that's a good point. Okay, so why don't we go on to the next release, which was Skids, the Parallel Skids. Is that correct? That came out before the Starter Decks, right? Has anyone played Parallel Skids? I know Man from Ling, I think you did, right?
I have, yeah.
What do you think about him?
I think he's cool. I think he's more in keeping with what rogues are doing these days than the old Skids. The old Skids leans heavily into the whole gaining additional actions mechanic that was predominant in, I'd say, the core set, and then the Dunwich Legacy. There were lots of cards that focused on gaining additional actions and whatnot, and then the rogue class has sort of shifted away from that to more of a resource generation mechanic, where they want to generate a pile of resources and then leverage those resources in order to pass skill tests and whatnot, or to fuel their events. And I think the new Skids is much more in keeping with that theme than the old one. And I do like how they changed up his deck building options as well to liberate him from the Guardian class, which while you can play him as a Guardian, he's not necessarily well suited to playing as a Guardian sometimes. And adding some of the Survivor cards into the mix, I think, works well for him.
So just for listeners at home, he gains access to, what is it, Tactic and Fortune cards, is that correct?
No, it's Gambit and Fortune
Gambit
cards.
and Fortune cards. So what, so he gets access to Lucky, correct? And he gets access to, what else does he get access to with the Gambit trade? I'm drawing a huge blank here.
Yeah, there's quite a few cards. Gambit, I'm not sure if Gambit has many cards. It's one or the other. It's either Gambit or Fortune. Gambit doesn't really add, I'm just going to check here quickly, but I mean, I think the biggest change to him is that you can pack 6 copies of Lucky if you want. Yeah, the Gambit trait doesn't add a whole lot. It only adds Active Desperation, Belly of the Beast, Last Chance, and Practice Makes Perfect. Fortune adds quite a few more, because most of the Fortune cards are Survivor cards. But when you get to, because of his upgrade, his ability to upgrade cards and keep the level 0 version in, you can actually get 6 copies of Lucky or 4 copies of Hot Streak and stuff like that, which is pretty crazy. Which is not, it's not something I expected to see in an Investigator, but obviously the designers felt that it would be balanced.
Yeah, I totally glossed over that aspect of his ability to keep additional copies. That's actually really cool.
Yeah, it doesn't affect that many cards because there aren't that many cards that qualify for it. I think I'm just looking quickly at the list, and there's only basically Look What I Found, A Chance Encounter, Daredevil, Dumb Luck, Hot Streak, Lucky being the most, I guess, oops too. If you ever played that, now you can have 4 copies of that in your deck if you're really bad at hitting enemies. But yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting change, and it's nice that those cards don't count against your deck limit either. He does start with only, I believe, 25 cards in his deck, and then presumably as you upgrade, those cards don't count. So he ends up having basically the same deck size as every other Investigator. He just starts at a lower level because they expect you to upgrade to those, to double Hot Streak and potentially triple Lucky if you really want to be lucky.
So what did you play through the what is it, live or die or all in?
All or nothing. Live or die is is Daisy's. Yeah, I played it. I think it's actually I didn't play it very well, but I just sort of threw a deck together and played it, and I think it seems easier than Live or Die was, but I think like you have to hit, in order to really succeed at it, you need to hit like 60 resources or something like that. So I think if you're playing solo, it's pretty easy. It's easier, I should say, because there's, especially if you use I like that they included the option to use the upgrades from Return to the Dunwich Legacy as well. So there's a few more ways to generate resources. So you've got to hit 60 resources per investigator, which I think is quite possible in solo. But I would hate to play it in multiplayer, because I just don't think you would be able to. Skids could probably do it, but other investigators simply are not equipped to generate that many resources. So 60 resources per investigator would be...
You play Jenny, Preston, Skids, and...
yeah, it would have to be an all rogue group, because otherwise, like, it's just not the type of scenario that you could play with sort of your typical Guardian Seeker Rogue X type of group of players, because the others just wouldn't be able to amass enough resources to make it worth your while. Because I think you have to hit 30 or 40 in order to sort of break even.
I assume it's worded in such a way that as long as the group has a total of 60 per investigator, it's not like each investigator has to have 60.
No, yeah, it's as long as you get 60 resources per investigator. It doesn't matter who has those resources, but it would be a mighty Skids deck indeed that could come up with 240 resources in a game.
All right, that's the new challenge for anyone listening. 240 resources on Skid. Let's see it.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, if Skids can do that, then I think it's worth your while playing it in multiplayer. But if you can't, then yeah, it's pretty tough. I do like it. I do love the parallel investigators and the options. The option of having an additional scenario if you're playing that particular investigator, and I really like how they're changing up the investigators. I do hope though that after they release a few more of these parallel investigators, that they do release them in an official product, because I think I personally tend to forget about them because they're not physical.
Do you think they actually will release them in a physical product?
I think they will once they get a few. I mean, if they released Arkham Horror, anything is possible.
No, they're different though.
Yeah, but I think that players would appreciate having physical copies of the parallel investigators, especially when they're going to play at events like Gen Con or Arkham Nights and stuff like that.
There's a printing site out of England, as a lot of things tend to be, that offers the high quality printed versions of those. So I ordered Daisy and Skids from them. Same thing they did recently with Ronin. They came out with the Ronin small set for Marvel Champions, and a lot of people started making money by printing those professionally. So I'm glad that some people from the community are stepping up, but I agree 100%. A lot of people don't want to touch it if it's not official or at least professionally made. So it'd be nice if they came out with some form of bringing them out eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm no marketing person, but I think what they could do is say if they created all parallel versions of all 5 core set investigators and then release those with their new signature cards and each of the updates for the scenarios, that would probably be, fit within that product. They like, say, a starter deck product, but it would be like a parallel investigator product. So you get 5 investigators plus their signatures plus.
Or they could sprinkle them in with like return twos or something. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, just to and that way you could have the set of them if that's interesting.
I think the only challenge with that, though, is the nature of the parallel investigators, that you can swap the fronts and backs of each of them. I think that kind of presents a challenge from a logistical standpoint, because you'd have to either print like each half separately, or you'd have to print like all the possible iterations per investigator, which I think would be strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also hard to, because the scenarios that come with them. So like Skids is from the core set, but his scenario is from the Dunwich Legacy expansion. So the people buying these packs would have to own all those products. They'd have to own Dunwich in order to benefit from the Skids pack.
Yeah, but that's no different than, if you buy the Forgotten Age, you're supposed to own a core set, right? It's not unprecedented that you have to own other products in order to play.
Yeah, like the Return to, I get what you're saying. Like the Return to set, you need the core set and that expansion and all the packs that come with it. I get that. But I feel like this is kind of more specific. I do hope that they come out with these in physical form, because I do like having an official card printed from the manufacturer. But I don't know. I guess you're right. If Barkham's possible, then anything's possible. I just don't know how well it'll sell.
Yeah, it's like, not to say that it's impossible. It's just, I think it presents a lot of challenges.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that there's as big of a market as even the Return to sets, which already don't have a huge market to begin with. For someone to do these challenges, I think it's more like the hardcore players. Parallel Skids seems geared towards like the really competitive players that like to play, survivors, because this Parallel Skids is very, very big on combo potential, and those type of players really like investigators like that. Little things like, putting Lucky Cigarette Case so you can initiate that free test and always draw cards for free or whatever, like that. Those little things are the things that a lot of the competitive or more hardcore players that like to play on expert like to play. And I don't know that there's as many people that are into that kind of thing. I do like the idea of having different versions of the investigators and being able to try different things out with them, but I don't know. I don't know that there's a huge market for it per se, someone willing to spend money on it.
Yeah, I understand what Nate's saying about like printing because you can swap the fronts and backs, but I think that if you just printed parallel Skids with the parallel back, that would be enough, because the back of the card doesn't really play any role in the game after deck building. So as long as you had the front of Skids, it doesn't really matter what's on the back, as long as you followed the deck building options, it's fine.
Yeah, I think the best way to go about it would be to, like you said, Man from Lang, like print them in a starter deck type fashion, and then you'd also just have to print all the encounter cards that you would need. I think that would be the only realistic way of going about it, to ensure that people had the cards they needed in order to play them. Because I don't think reprinting encounter cards really hampers much, right? Like I still couldn't play X scenario if I only had the encounter cards. Like I would still need the act and the agenda cards as well, so.
It could also be like a return to that investigator. You're revisiting their abilities, but then you could also revisit some cards that keyed off with them and slightly alter those. So, there's a lot of cool possibilities out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of ways that you could go with a product like that, for sure.
Yeah, if they threw in a handful of updated play, like maybe advanced versions of cards that worked with that particular investigator, that might be worthwhile.
That might be more enticing. I agree with that. But as it is right now, I don't know, because you mentioned the Return to, Nathan, and in a way, yeah, but a Return to campaign, most people play the game will play a campaign, so there's that whole market. But investigators are a very specific thing, and so a Return to investigator, if I already have Skids and I don't like to play him, I don't have any really good incentive to buy an alternate version of him, other than, I feel like trying them out, but would I be willing to spend money to do that if I already have Skids, the regular Skids? I don't know. But as Man from Lang said, if they include different player cards like the new Investigator packs, then it'd be far more enticing, I think. So that would be, if they are putting it out, then that probably would be the way to go for them.
Well, speaking of the new Investigator decks, that seems to be a pretty hot button topic within the community recently. Before I kind of give my hot takes on how I feel about them after playing all of them, why don't you guys go ahead and share your thoughts first?
Well, I'm putting together some videos about the starter decks, and primarily focus, because I play mostly solo, so the multiplayer aspect is not my thing so much. But having played Nathaniel and Harvey quite a bit, I can say with certainty that the Investigator starter decks are not good solo decks. They need a fair amount of tweaking to make them playable in solo. So if you're a solo player like me who expects to be able to pick these up and just start playing with them, you're in for a rude awakening, because they are lacking certain cards that make them viable in that format. And I think that of the two that I've played extensively, I think Nathaniel's is very focused on what it wants to do. Harvey's seems a little more unfocused, but again, not having had a chance to play it in multiplayer, I'm not entirely certain of that. But it seems like the Harvey deck is trying to do a bunch of different things, whereas Nathaniel's is focused on just doing one thing, killing enemies, and it does that very, very well.
Yes, I certainly agree with you, Man from Lang, but I have some hot takes, I think. So why don't we let everyone else go first before I kind of spill my rant?
I like the idea of the Investigator decks. I think it's a product that people have been wanting, and I think adding new player cards has brought a lot of excitement into the community, because the release of the Investigator decks, I believe it was Optimal Play, made the comment like, this is the biggest release in one shot of new player cards in the history of Arkham Horror, the card game. I think even the core set didn't have as many player cards released at one time. So if you buy all of the Investigator decks, you're getting a ton of player cards, which is really cool. And there's all sorts of new ones that interact pretty interesting in pretty interesting ways with existing investigators. So I really, really appreciate that they put this product out. Player cards are, I think, one of the things that people really look forward to. But that's, I think, changing, but we'll get to that in a minute when you do your hot takes, Nate, I'm sure. But overall, I like getting new investigators. I like seeing new takes on things. So like they all have pretty unique and cool abilities. I do agree with Man from Lang. These are not solo investigators. So that's a miss on their part, because they really could have targeted the solo audience. And it feels like this product would be an ideal thing for someone who plays solo to pick up.
No, I think they can. I mean, I've played them solo, and they're quite capable of playing solo. It's just the decks that, as printed, are not solo decks.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So like, pick up the deck and just play it solo. Like, you just can't. The investigators work fine in solo with existing player card pool, but you'd have to do some deck building. But the packs as they come aren't good for solo. So I do wish that they would have focused on that a little bit more too. But overall, they had, the packs had some really interesting player cards. Not a fan of the Seeker thing going on in this one. I think we were talking on Discord about that a little bit. I loved a few of the Mystic cards, and the Guardian cards are, like you said, really focused. The Guardian cards are ones that I didn't care for as much either, because, and I'm a huge Guardian player, but because they mostly seem to work best with Nathaniel. So a lot of the cards in that pack, most other Guardians are going to pick up one or two of those, but not as many. Whereas like the Mystic one, the Rogue ones are definitely, and the Survivor ones are definitely better for a number of different investigators.
All right, Nathan, tell us what you think.
I mean, I think overall, considering that they tried to appeal to both newer players that haven't been able to make a deck or whatever, and veterans who wanted content and new investigators, I mean, I think they did pretty good overall. Sure, it would have been nice if they would have also been able to make them solo focused, or at least one or two of them be really good solo focused. But I mean, I think they already had a lot to bite off. It does seem like they did it fairly well. They sold out online. We sold through 40 copies of each at our store. People tended to be excited. I like the flavors of the investigators. I thought, it was really interesting that they brought a transgender character to the Arkham world in the form of Stella. Someone had initially posted online that they thought that people were being transphobic because Stella was the only one that didn't insta-sell out. But when I did the giveaway for a couple of the Investigator decks, Stella was the clear favorite by it was 65% of people chose Stella of the 5, which is pretty amazing. Nathaniel Cho, Killing Machine, people joked that they wanted to build a Guardian deck or a Nathaniel Cho Killer deck. I thought that was pretty funny. A lot of people are interested to play Stella. I don't know if they have, but there was a lot of interest. Harvey Walters, once again, you get to play around with the new mechanic with the card draw. That's been popular, but once again, multiplayer I think would shine better for that one. The concept of having the Aviatrix with Winnie is awesome. And I haven't opened her up to look carefully. Does she actually have a chainsword in her pack?
No, Stella has a chainsaw.
Chainsaw. That's what I was thinking. That's pretty sweet. And then finally, we have the Mystic, Jacqueline Fine, I believe. And people like the shenanigans you can do with her. So I'm happy overall with them. I think that it's great for content. I think it's great for, once again, just adding to your options in the community. Going back to one of the things that you two focused on a lot, the concept of coming out with really solo-friendly Investigator pre-mades, that might be a focus for the future. Something that you can play solo or break apart and get great cards. Overall, I've been happy with them.
Explode, Nate, explode.
Yeah, you've kept us in suspense, so I feel like there's just gonna be another 5 minutes of nothing but rage.
No, I'm not gonna full on go angry gamer rage mode. Let's start with the things that I like. So like Nathan was saying, I like the fact that they exist. I like the idea behind them. I like that they kind of have simple deck building rules, which makes it more intuitive for a newer player getting into the game. And I like that they overall demonstrate what each of the classes is kind of geared towards doing, maybe to a lesser extent Winifred, in my opinion. So I like all that about it, but I do have some criticisms. Like Man from Lang was saying, the Nathaniel Cho deck is very focused on doing one thing, and that's pretty much all it's geared towards doing, which can really kind of make the deck feel like you're doing a whole lot of nothing until enemies show up. Which I think, as a newer player, you might kind of just sit around and go, oh, well, I guess I'll just gain 2 resources and draw a card or something like that for multiple turns until enemies show up. So I think given some of the way that scenarios are designed, like Miskatonic Museum, for example, Nathaniel might have just a bad time playing a scenario like that because there just isn't much for him to do.
Well, now wait for it. Along those lines, when I've been in a situation playing multiplayer where Guardian, in this case, let's say Nathaniel Cho, is waiting to set up, is waiting to fight, they can help the Seeker and other players by going around to the different locations, helping people see where to go, what's going on, setting up to be in a good position to help protect other people. So they don't always have to be actively fighting. I've often found them to do other very helpful things and not just be in stasis. I just wanted to add that 2 cents.
Sure, that's a fair point. I think specifically with Nathaniel, though, the way you build his deck, you're so reliant on card draw and resource generation because of the nature of wanting to play events over assets. It kind of shoehorns you into this one one deck building like route, and you're kind of forced to do it to a lesser extent. Like you, as Nathaniel, you want to play the boxing gloves and you want to have Safeguard out pretty much like at the beginning of the game, and maybe to a lesser extent Relentless. But I think when Manastrophic and I played Nathaniel and Winifred, we didn't find Relentless to be very useful. And there were definitely a lot of turns where he would just kind of draw a couple cards, gain a resource, end his turn. So I just think it can kind of paint this sort of less than compelling image of Guardians, where I feel like Guardians are very interesting. Like they have a mix of like Carolyn and Roland that are all kind of, they do multiple different things. Winifred's deck is odd to me. So it feels like it's very split on what it wants to do. There's some cards that kind of interact with dealing damage, like you have Switchblade, you have the Mauser, you have Sharpshooter, and you have the Beretta, I believe. And, you know, those kind of all gear towards like punching and killing enemies. But then you have this other aspect, since she has 5 agility, where you kind of want to evade enemies. And that's all well and good, but it feels very split in its focus, and neither of them are particularly good in my experience. The other thing that kind of really bothers me about Winifred's deck is that there's only 4 skill cards, 5 if you include her signature card. So she has literally almost 0 way of dealing with willpower treachery cards. So when I played through The Gathering and Midnight Masks, I got stuck with a Frozen in Fear and had absolutely 0 way of getting rid of it.
Yeah, I noticed that about the Nathaniel deck as well. It's, I mean, they go so all in on what they're trying to do that like Nathaniel has, I think I counted 5 cards in his deck, or maybe it was 8, with 1 agility icon apiece. So if he gets tagged by something, he has virtually no way of passing it. Whereas if they had included a card like Take the Initiative, that would have given him some options. So I feel like if you were a new player who picked up the Nathaniel deck and just played, and then got hit by not just, you know, an agility treachery, but there are quite a few agility tests on agenda and act cards as well. Like if you're playing Curtain Call, for example, Nathaniel has a very bad time once you advance the act, because he just doesn't have the agility to deal with the movement, and then he doesn't have any agility icons, really any agility icons in his deck to deal with them. So he sort of gets stuck. And I think I noticed the same thing about Winifred, where she just, I mean, they give her 1 willpower and then absolutely no way of dealing with willpower treacheries, which make up most of the encounter deck.
Yeah, so it's just like I was stuck with Frozen in Fear for, I think it was seriously like 7 or 8 turns, and it's just like moments like that just feel frustrating when you just pick up the deck and play it, which, you know, I think is kind of the intention, right? Like they even include like upgrade cards for it, so I think they do intend for people to pick these up and just play them out of the box. And moments like that, I feel, just really kind of sour one's experience to the game. But going into Jacqueline and Stella, I actually felt like those decks were the most balanced in what they wanted to do. Jacqueline in particularly was actually very enjoyable to play right out of the box. You know, she suffers from the classic Mystic problem of you need your assets in play early in the game to be able to do, you know, like enemy management and investigating pretty competently. But she does have 3 intellect, and she does actually have cards that interact well with her ability, like Voice of Ra and the Scrying Mirror and things like that, that actually feel really interesting to play around with. And she's also great for someone like me in particular that likes to draw nothing but autofail tokens. So Jacqueline, I think, is my favorite overall. And Stella was, she was fine. Not Jacqueline fine, but, you know, like the deck didn't feel like it was lacking anything per se. I do kind of wish she had just like 1 or 2 more ways of killing enemies, because when I played through The Gathering, it ended up getting to the point where I just needed like 1 or 2 more ammo to just be able to deal with all the enemies. And then Harvey, to me, feels like the most powerful right out of the box, just given the nature of his signature card and the fact that he just draws so many cards, you always have access to the things that you need. And having 5 intellect is much better than having 5 agility or 5 combat, because the intellect stat as a whole is a proactive stat where every other stat in the game is reactive, in that it relies on having conditions to be useful. So Harvey, to me, just feels the most powerful out of the box, and I have a gripe with the fact that Harvey's deck has more resource generation than the Rogue does, but also has a lower cost curve and has better icons than any of the other decks, in my opinion. So, like, Harvey's deck feels like a step above all the other ones, and I think Jacqueline and Stella feel relatively on a same power level, and then Winifred and Nathaniel out of the box feel like they need the most upgrading.
That's interesting, because when I look at the Harvey deck, I feel like he has a lot of cards that draw a lot of cards, but that doesn't win you games in itself, like cards that draw other cards that draw other cards. And a lot of his deck seems to be focused on pumping his willpower and intellect even higher. And I think once you hit 5 intellect, you're already doing pretty well. And he's got it seems like he's got 3 elements. He's got like the cards that draw more cards. Then he's got the cards that expand his hand size so he can accommodate all those extra cards. And then he's got the tome thing going on where he gains additional hand slots for tomes and whatnot.
I don't know if you heard me talk, because I think we talked at the same time. Do you feel like he's too one-dimensional right out of the box?
I haven't played it. I've played him in solo, and he needs a lot of work if you're going to play him in solo. I'm not too sure in how he would do in a multiplayer setting. Obviously 5 intellect is... Harvey could be blank and I'd play him.
It's interesting that you had that experience, because I had pretty much the exact opposite experience, where it's like, oh, I had an enemy, occult invocation deals with that, and then I'll move about my business, and then I just, you didn't need any help investigating, and you had all the resources you needed to be able to play everything. Yeah,
but occult invocation only deals 3 damage. If you hit a 4 health enemy, you're screwed. Because you can't, I died playing extracurricular activity because I just draw a Yathian Observer and couldn't deal with it. I can deal 3 damage to it, but I have no, if your occult invocation misses for some reason, you draw an auto fail or whatnot, your game is basically over at that point. Because Harvey has absolutely no, the thing about the Harvey Walters deck that I don't understand is that while they include occult invocation, so that's sort of your replacement for I've got a plan, but they don't include mind over matter.
Well, they have an upgraded mind over matter.
Well, they have an upgraded version, but that doesn't do you any good when you start a campaign. And that to me seems like, if you're going to leave an investigator with, 1 combat and 2 agility, he needs, you're going to face those tests at some point. And much like Nathaniel and
Winifred,
they just sort of just leave him hanging there. It's just like you have no possibility to pass these tests should you get hit with them. Which to me seems like, yeah, I can understand why you would go all or nothing, but all or nothing is usually not a great strategy.
Yeah, I think even in multiplayer, it's definitely not great. There also isn't a lot of compelling ways for him to discover multiple clues aside from extensive research.
Yeah, he has deduction as well, but he doesn't have a ton of ways to discover additional clues, which is a bit of a, if that's the role you want your seeker to play, Harvey is not ideal for that. But when it's interesting that you should say that you found the Winifred deck unfocused, because I haven't played the deck, the starter deck version of her. I have played her a lot with my own build, and I think she's a great investigator. But when I look at the deck, it is the one I am looking forward the least to playing, because it seems like if you're including cards like Daredevil, you need more skills, and she doesn't have enough skills. And I also find that in my experience playing the whole succeed by 2 mechanic, at the beginning anyway, it's not very good at level 0. It gets much better once you gain some experience points, but I just find it's too inconsistent at level 0, largely because Opportunist 0 is not particularly good. So if you miss a couple skill tests early, then you dig yourself a hole you can't get out of.
Yeah, what bothers me about the Winifred deck, like you were saying, is that there isn't enough skills to make Daredevil a compelling card to play, but you need every wild icon you can get to deal with willpower treachery. So you're kind of forced to play it, and then like you mill like half your deck just to find an Opportunist just for another willpower icon, and that like it just feels frustrating because you're still like usually even on those tests, and then you're still likely to fail anyway.
Yeah, well, the difference between 1 willpower and 2 willpower is very significant, because if you're at 2 and if you run into a Rotting Remains or a Frozen in Fear, occasionally you can luck into passing. But when you're at 1, there is no way of passing, even if you get lucky. So then you've got to you definitely have to commit cards and or spend resources to pass it, and you've got to spend a lot of cards and or resources just to get even, much less get ahead. And so if you're taking if you get unlucky and you have to take a lot of those tests, you simply don't have the cards and resources to do that. Now I've played her against scenarios in the Circle Undone, but I think you've got to build a very specific deck to deal with that. You just can't. There's a couple of thoughts on playing those low willpower rogues, and the one is just simply ignore the willpower tests. You just take it to the face all the time, and you can't do that. I just think you're setting yourself up for failure, because like you said, you get tagged by Frozen in Fear and sit with it in your threat area for 6 turns, and the action disadvantage that you are suffering is just too great to come back from.
Yeah, and like it's weird to me that Harvey has more cards that generate resources than the Rogue does, but also has a lower cost curve. It like those kind of things like irk me a bit.
Yeah, as far as when I looked at the Rogue deck, that was the other thing I noticed, is that there's the lack of resource generation cards compared to Harvey is pretty noticeable. Like they could have thrown in a Watch This or something like that
which is like Winifred's card, right? Like Watch This feels like almost like another signature for her.
Yeah, and I mean the value of the signature cards is pretty wide open too. I mean, Winifred's signature seems to me like it's just overkill. It's like, okay, I'm going to pass 1 test. It's like, okay, well that's great, but if you're taking a lot of willpower tests.
Yeah, like clearly it's meant to be like I succeed by 2 or more, I get to trigger a bunch of stuff. But like Stella has 3 copies of her 3 wild icon skills in her deck. Jacqueline's asset is super useful. I found that to be very good when I played the Jacqueline deck. Harvey's Vault of Knowledge is horrendously powerful. And Randall seems, it fits Nathaniel's deck, whereas like Winifred's is just the most lackluster.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
Like to kind of circle back around about positive things, I really liked the Jacqueline deck. I felt like that was the most well-designed deck of the 5. Personally.
It's funny because Mystics were the class that I least cared for way back when it was just the Corset and Dunwich. And now I'm starting to find myself liking Mystics a lot more. They don't feel like before, where you pretty much every Mystic like deck looked pretty much the same. I don't know. I feel like now the card pool has grown so much that you have all these different things that Mystics can do, and Jacqueline expand that even more with her deck. She seems really interesting to me. I haven't had a chance to really get her on the board with her actual starter deck, but Yeah, she seems like the most fun as well to me.
Yeah, it's just like her deck feels the most cohesive. Like all the cards synergize with each other, right? Like the way she generates resources synergizes with her ability to pull additional tokens, and her assets are, they work in tandem with her high willpower. Like the deck all just kind of like makes sense when you look at Jacqueline as an investigator, but
not overboard like Nathaniel, where all his cards are clearly geared toward his ability, but it's like too much, like you guys said, too focused. Or Harvey, where it's his cards kind of synergize too, but it's too much. But Jacqueline's feel, like you said, just her ability synergize well with her, but they're not overpowered. They do different things. They're not single-minded to all do one thing.
Yeah, and then like my other concern is once you take these decks apart, some of the cards in these decks are very powerful. Like cards that come to mind are like Cryptic Writings, Burning the Midnight Oil.
All the secret cards.
It's strange to me. I feel like a lot of the secret cards, once you take them out of the Harvey deck and you build your own decks, they feel the most powerful. Whereas like once you take Nathaniel's deck apart, like I feel like it doesn't add much to the Guardian card pool.
Yeah, there'll be a couple that Guardians will take, like the one where you, when you engage an enemy or when you start a fight action, you gain 2 resources. Like I can see other Guardians using that card, but other than that, you're right. Like most of those cards are pretty much best in his deck and don't feel as good in other other investigators' decks.
Right, like Nathaniel has a strict benefit to playing a card like Monster Slayer 0, but like if you put that in a Roland deck, for instance, like is that like, would you rather play Monster Slayer or would you rather play like a 45 or a Machete or something like that? Nathan, you had asked who these decks are marketed towards, and I think we've kind of covered that subject a little bit. But what are your thoughts about that question?
Once again, I think it's a dual newer players and veterans, so I thought they did very well as far as marketing them for sales. But once again, coming up with some way to market them towards solo players would be smart eventually as well. That was just my quick skinny.
Yeah, I think the decks they're fine. Like once you take them all apart, like having all those cards and taking the investigators and building your own decks, I think the investigators are very competent. I think aside from Nathaniel, I think Nathaniel's probably the weakest of the 5, just because he's so hyper focused on what he wants to do. Whereas all the other investigators feel much more flexible, and you could build competent decks with them. I think in solo, I think in multiplayer, Nathaniel Cho just smacks enemies to high heaven, and it's gonna feel great.
I have found Nathaniel to be very competent in solo. If you build him, if you can solve the whole investigate problem with him, then he can be very, very competent. I have played him against a bunch of different scenarios, and I think it's actually, I sort of actually like playing the low intellect Guardians solo, because they're so good at killing enemies that as long as you can manage to get a few clues along the way, that you've dealt with the 2 main parts of the game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like I'm not saying he's bad by any means, but I think like just comparing the 5 as in a vacuum, I think that he might be the most challenging to initially to kind of build around, but that's just my opinion personally. But it's interesting that you have a totally different experience with him.
Yeah, I've only really had a chance to play him and Harvey solo, and I think that of the 2, if you told me which one to play, I would probably I might choose Nathaniel over Harvey, but I mean they're pretty equal, as long as Harvey has the opposite problem of Nathaniel, where Nathaniel's all in on fight and lacks investigate. Harvey is all in on investigate and lacks fight, so you have to compensate for that. And Harvey's deck certainly provides level 0 seekers with a few more tools to deal with to deal with enemies. Disc of Exham 0 and Occult, is it Innovation? Occult Invocation are both pretty good additions. But I mean, that's the problem with Seekers in general, is that ultimately you've got to determine how you're going to kill enemies over the length of a campaign, which usually means you've got to go into one of the unidentified assets, whether you're going to go Ancient Stone or Archaic Glyphs or Strange Solution to deal with enemies. And just looking at Harvey's deck comes with Forbidden Tome, but that to me seems it takes 5 actions before to deal with it, and the upgrades for it don't really do enough in terms of damage. Like, I think Archaic Glyphs, if you want to go Prophecy Foretold, that takes 3 actions to solve it, whereas Forbidden Tome takes 5. And 5 is a lot when you're playing solo.
Yeah. I mean, I think Harvey gives Seekers the most useful tools, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like the Stella deck, like, yeah, it has some neat new combat tricks for survivors that they definitely needed. But I think overall the best cards in the Stella deck are reprints. And like the Jacqueline deck is just, I think, a home run, I think, for me personally. And then the Winifred deck, again, kind of suffers from a similar issue that the Nathaniel and the Harvey decks suffer from. I was like, yes, they provide some interesting options for maybe 1 or 2 of the rogues, like on a card by card basis, but on the whole, I think that they definitely need the most tweaking, and they offer kind of the least to their class as a whole.
Well, I mean, you can look at, as soon as you look at Winifred and she's got 5 agility and you expect, okay, that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And then you have the Mauser and it's just like, okay, so you intend for me to fight things instead of evading them? Is that that to me sends a mixed message as soon as you open the pack.
Yeah, I get that impression too. It's just, it's weird. Because like the Jacqueline deck and the Stella deck feel so well designed, and the other 3 feel a little lacking in my opinion. Like as a deck as a whole, like not the cards individually or anything like that, because I think a lot of the cards are very good. But we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the Investigator starter decks. Why don't we go ahead and move on to our next topic here? This is a topic of conversation that I've been having with a lot of other community members recently, and I'm curious to see what you guys think. And we've kind of touched on it already, but what are your guys' thoughts about the Arkham design recently? And do you feel like it's truly a solo game anymore?
I play 99% solo, and I still feel like it's... I haven't played all of the new scenarios yet, but... with the exception of a few in Circle Undone, I still do fairly well. I think one of the things is that you've got to... I think designer Matt Newman often tries to, like, with each campaign, he challenges you to build decks differently. So if you take, say, the Guardian deck that you were using against Knight of the Zealot and then play that against Dunwich Legacy, it may not do as well because you need to change it up, and then you play it against the Path to Carcosa, and again you need to change it up. You can't just play the same style of deck. So I think if you're willing to evolve with the campaigns, you can do pretty well. I think if you just sort of run headlong into each campaign with the same deck, then you're going to struggle. But I think the Circle Undone certainly raised the bar for a few of the scenarios where they were quite difficult to beat playing on solo.
What about you, Vase? How do you feel? Because you're a predominantly solo player too.
Yeah, I think for solo players, they're thinking about them after the fact, after they design stuff. It's almost like they're throwing us the scraps for the scenarios. That's how I feel. They're building these scenarios with multiplayer in mind, definitely. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Between the complexity increasing and difficulty increasing, I feel like for a solo player, it's becoming harder and harder to play this game. At least, with the official releases.
Do you feel like does anyone feel that's intentional? I mean, or do you think it's just a byproduct of making this game?
I mean, I don't think it's intentional. I think they're just forgetting about the solo player, It's fine, if they want to make this more of a co-op game that's for people getting together. But I think in the times of COVID, it's even more important to understand that a lot of people are playing by themselves or playing this game on their own, and playing solo games because, that's just the nature of the world right now.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I'm sure a lot of the products that have come out recently were designed like well over a year ago at this point.
And that's fair. That's a fair statement. But even before COVID, I mean, I think the game, I think you've mentioned it before, Nate, where they've definitely marketed the game as a very cool solo game in addition to being a co-op game. But I feel like the solo player kind of gets a shaft in a lot of things. The Circle and Done, like you mentioned, Man from Lang, that was a not a great experience for a solo player, at least for me. Between the difficulty just being extremely swingy and, beating you in the face repeatedly, but also for me, it's like the complexity. It's hard for me to keep track of so many things going on at once. And I feel like a lot of the newer scenarios just keep getting more and more complex. Trigger after trigger, one trigger triggers another trigger triggers another trigger, and then you have to keep these things in mind. And then every phase, there's like, oh, this triggers in this phase, this triggers in that phase. So there's all these things to keep track of. And then I feel like lately, a lot of the player cards are also kind of doing that kind of thing. So the game is fun for solo. It really is. But more and more I'm seeing, like on the Discord and on the community, a lot of people kind of rage quitting solo and saying, okay, that's it. I'm not doing true solo anymore. It's just, you can only take a beating in the face so many times, or, just being overwhelmed so many times.
Yeah, I think for me, it's not so much that the scenarios get more complex. I feel like it's more like the design approach behind some of the scenarios. Like, I think for one, the increasing of generally, like, it seems like there's a lot more 3 health enemies, which kind of forces you to deal with them in more efficient ways. And then there's also, it seems like, there's a lot of like weird, quirky things that are probably fine in multiplayer. To use the recent end of the A side of the Dream Eaters, spoilers for that, by the way, at the end of that scenario, you have to confront Nyarlathotep, but you have to end up drawing 3 cards out of the encounter deck to find him, essentially. So you have to spend actions to draw cards for the encounter deck to find him, and you have to find, I think it's 1 plus the amount of players. So in solo it'd be 2. So you have to dig through 2 cards, or you have to find 2 cards out of a 30 plus card deck, versus when you're playing in multiplayer, you have 4 times the amount of actions, but you only have to find an additional 3 cards. So there's things like that kind of make me question some of the approaches. And then I'm also kind of curious how they're going to handle 15 location scenarios, like what we've seen with the recent Into the Deep or Into Deep, the first Mythos pack for the Innsmouth Conspiracy, as something like that could be very action intensive. And if you just don't have enough actions to move around the board, then scenarios like that are going to feel frustrating.
Now that you mentioned Innsmouth, right? So they've spoiled, there was a preview article where they spoiled some of the mechanics and some of the things going on in that scenario. But, back to the complexity. I mean, not just the difficulty in moving for 15 locations, but that same scenario has flooding things are happening. So you're putting tokens. Then there's the blessed tokens and cursed tokens. So you're constantly taking in and out of the bag. There was one other thing that was happening. Oh yeah, the blocks. So there's locations that are blocked. And so you have to deal with all these different little things. And I feel like there's just so much going on.
There are also the keys you have to find.
The keys. Yeah. There's just so many things going on. It's just getting more and more complex.
Just real quick, Vase, going back to what you were saying, and then people piggybacking on that. The fascinating thing I found at a retailer level for board games and card games is that nowadays a lot of people are adding a solo variant to their board games. It's interesting though, because it makes you wonder if it's that more game designers want to be able to play it solo, or if they feel the need to market the game, they should make it soloable, right? So it's interesting that you're seeing an uptick in that, but then you're arguing that Arkham is becoming too complex for a true solo. But I feel like years and years ago with, the Lord of the Rings LCG, and Man from Lane can attest to this, it quickly got outstripped from being true soloable to you pretty much have to play two-handed because of the difficulty of the quests. I mean, would you not agree that two-handed is quite viable still for Arkham?
Two-handed is fine. There's a lot of people that play two-handed, but there are a lot of people that play true solo, though. And, I don't want to have to be forced into playing two investigators, especially, the difficulty for true solo is a thing. It's a real thing. So if you play two-handed, okay, the difficulty is managed. But the complexity portion of it, if you're playing two-handed, you just added more complexity to it, not less, It's a fine line, and I understand they're trying to innovate, but, I don't know that adding so much complexity is the answer to innovation. I think, like, making a good scenario that's good story and uses investigate and fight, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a boring scenario. You don't have to constantly push the envelope with innovation.
Part of me agrees with that statement. Like, I get where you're coming from. I think there is certainly a portion of the player base that wants new gimmicks and new mechanics to be present within the scenarios. And like, I understand that, they try to create mechanics that are based on, certain aspects of the story that they want to tell within each campaign, right? Like Explore tells the narrative of trekking out into the jungle, and Haunted is supposed to be, like you tampering with forces that you shouldn't be tampering with, which I have my criticisms of, but I get it on that front. For me, I think it's more that it's not so much the difficulty level, it's more that the scenarios themselves feel like that there's just like too much like action intensity for a single investigator. And then I think the band-aid of playing two-handed it doesn't solve the problem. It just kind of kicks the can down the road, so to speak. Like if somebody wants to play the game solo, and if they market it solo, and then it leaves that kind of experience with people, I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing, personally.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that maybe they need to figure out a way to make it challenging, but not, punch in the face for solo players, and then still manage to make it the same thing for multiplayer.
I guess for me, like, the issue is scalability, right? Like Circle Undone, I think, is pretty egregious on some of those aspects, like Secret Name, Wages of Sin, and Union and Dissolution particularly come to mind. But then there's also some scenarios in Dream Eaters that can kind of leave you with that feeling too, like Where the Gods Dwell and Dark Side of the Moon, and I guess kind of to a lesser extent Point of No Return. Like those scenarios are very, very lengthy for a solo investigator. It just like it asks a lot of you. Whereas like in a group, like you have, X times, it's like the amount of resources that you have becomes exponential. So I think it's more just the scaling is a little off on a lot of things, personally.
It definitely feels off in a lot of scenarios. I think the scenarios that people find the least enjoyable are usually the ones that don't scale well either. The other ones that you mentioned, pretty much. And it's a tough thing to decode here. And, the mechanics of the game are already set in stone pretty much, like they can add new things, but scalability on certain aspects, like we were talking on Discord, high intellect or having high intellect is extremely beneficial for solo. Extremely. I mean, to the point where if you have an intellect 5 investigator, you can focus your deck on handling enemies and treacheries, because intellect 5 is almost enough to to get by without even any help, if you're playing on standard difficulty. And then you have investigators that are not like that. And sure, yeah, you can have investigators that are more challenging than others, but that becomes a problem when you're trying to play solo and you like a certain investigator, and it's just not possible to play a certain investigator in certain scenarios at all. I think that's definitely an issue, and FFG needs to find a way. And it's definitely, I understand the difficulty that they're facing on this, but they need to find a way to draw new players, but they also need to keep things interesting for existing players. So when you come out with a scenario that's way too difficult for a new player, but seems okay when someone has the entire card pool available, that's an issue that a lot of card games have, or a lot of board games have already. But I feel like in this game, it's becoming more and more apparent that that's eventually going to be something that they'll have to manage. Like when the card pool gets big enough, it's going to be very difficult to put out a scenario that's challenging to existing players, but also challenging and doable for new players.
I think part of the issue is the campaign nature of the game, where you're sort of expected to build a deck. As you go, you're building your deck, and it's sort of assumed that the deck you are building will be good against all of the scenarios in the campaign, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. I'll take the Secret Name, for example, which when you face check that scenario, it's very, very difficult to beat it on the first time. But I think if you were to, say, play that one first and then reverse engineer the deck to get there, you can be successful against it. The problem is, if you build a deck that can beat that scenario, can you then beat Wages of Sin or Union and Dissolution? And I'm not entirely sure if that's the case or not.
Yeah, that's a good point, man, from Lang. And it really, they really do kind of emphasize that campaign mode of play. And I think you could even take that example and use it into older campaigns like Carcosa too, right? Like the deck that you build for Curtain Call is not going to be as successful for the deck that you would want to build ideally for the Last King, right? Just given the nature of how those scenarios are so vastly different from one another. When you have scenarios that kind of have their own quirk, or, they have their own gimmick to it, it can feel frustrating when you do well in one scenario and your deck is kind of geared towards that, and then you go into the next one, you just get crushed, and you don't really have the resources to be able to retool the deck from scenario to scenario.
Yeah, I think speaking of the Path to Carcosa, I think that's very noticeable in something like the jump from the Unspeakable Oath to a Phantom of Truth, where a Phantom of Truth is demanding that you do something very different from what you have done previously. And if you are not prepared for it, then you can end up struggling, because a lot of the enemies have Hunter, and you need to be able to move, and you need to be able to evade.
It's certainly a challenge. I think one approach that they could take would be to make the campaigns more thematically consistent from scenario to scenario. Not from a story perspective, but from a mechanical standpoint. And I think the Forgotten Age particularly kind of does that pretty well for the most part, barring Heart of the Elders pretty much. But I think those scenarios feel consistent, right? I think they kind of stuck with the explore mechanic and went with it. And I just kind of wish that more campaigns would do that. Like you were saying, Path to Carcosa, from scenario to scenario makes it demands a player to do drastically different things, which in a multiplayer aspect, I think is great, because it allows players to shine in certain scenarios, but need help in other ones, which is a great thing for multiplayer. But when you play the game solo, it can be frustrating that you're playing a campaign and then you go from one scenario that feels fine to another one that just feels internally frustrating.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I do think the Forgotten Age, like you said, thematically, as far as the mechanics go, it's pretty in line with itself, and definitely feels more cohesive. I think maybe that's partially why it's one of my favorite campaigns. Because you build a deck on the first one, and that deck's it's going to perform in a similar way on the second scenario, third scenario. Yeah, I can certainly agree with that.
throughout the course of this episode. Why don't we kick it off to Nathan and talk about fan-made content and go from there?
Yeah, basically, there's been a lot of fan-made stuff going up recently. I think last time I touched on local artist, fan maker Michael Hawkins and the ones he did. But we just had one that went up, The Dead of Winter. I just downloaded that one. That's pretty awesome. I think that one might be up on the Facebook group. And then are you familiar with the famous Matastrophic?
Oh, yes, extensively. So we just played Arkham last week on stream, actually.
Yeah, he did the Carnival of Spiders. I don't know if am I saying that? Carnivale?
Carnevale,
I think either one is probably fine.
if you want to say it right.
But he basically took Carnivale of horrors and mixed it with the new Dream Eaters. So that way you now have a mix of the two, and really cool. And I don't know who he had the cover art do that, but that is gorgeous. So that's exciting. And then I dropped earlier that I'm going to take Arkham Central and I'm going to talk with people that have done fan content for investigators. So it'll kind of be like going out there and getting parallel versions in a way. You'll have more ways to play various investigators out there. And then I'm finishing up my scenario with Andrew Migliore soon. We're just working on it. Last weekend for a bit, we met at his place out in the garden, and we're social distance going over stuff. And we just, I don't think we're going to do more than one. So we just want to try and make it the best it can be when it comes out. Pretty exciting stuff. And then, like I said earlier, a lot of the, if you haven't checked out the people that do the Arkham Horror upgrades on Etsy, make sure you go to Etsy and put in Arkham Horror card game or Arkham Horror and check out all the many, many great people doing stuff. Oh, matter of fact, let me give a shout out to Tesseract Games. Nick Rose there has been making dividers for Marvel Champions, and then he started doing dividers for Arkham Horror, the card game. And he came out with a couple books. I believe one is a journal. The other one is a log of sorts. But check those out. They're pretty intricate. There's a lot of stuff on there that you would expect, but then there's a lot of content in there that you would not expect. And the attention to detail is mind-blowing. But definitely worth checking out. Once again, that was Tesseract Games. I just printed off Dead of Winter, and I'm going to be running that soon. It looks very... I don't know if anyone's done a lot with the winter expansions for Arkham Horror or Elder Sign, but it looks like it's set in that world with a lot of snow effects and the grim, basically direwolf type thing out there.
And I recently finally did my first draft of a fan-made scenario that I've been working on for the past couple of months now. The Exham Priory, which is an Arkham Horror retelling of the Rats on the Walls story by H.P. Lovecraft. So if you're interested in playtesting that, be sure to hit me up on Discord and I can provide you with the files, and any feedback would be greatly appreciated. I'm also looking to, at some point, have an artist to commission to have all the artwork done for it as well. So if you're an artist and you're looking for some work, be sure to hit me up on that front too. So
we're giving away a full set of the new Investigator packs.
Did you say a full set?
Full set.
Ooh.
Full set. And might be 2 sets. So we may have 2 winners, maybe. But yeah.
There's only one way to find out, though.
Yeah. So Discord, join our Great Old Ones Gaming Discord server, and we will be posting information shortly regarding the Scavenger Hunt. Basically, it's going to be a web-based Scavenger Hunt. Mostly, you'll be looking through different content that we make, and the winner is going to get a full set of the Investigator packs, and we'll ship anywhere in the world. So everyone is invited to play.
Always overly generous there, Base.
Yes, indeed. So as far as the Scavenger Hunt rules go, how do you plan on doing that, Vase? Is it going to be like a word search? Are you looking for certain words? Are you looking for certain phrases or something like that, or is it going to be something a little different?
We'll have a hunt on a few episodes, maybe certain things, certain topics, answer to specific questions is mostly what we're going to be doing. And then we will also be giving specific phrases in future episodes that will be coming out, or future content that we'll be posting. So all the rules and all that, all the details will be explained when in our Discord server. So join our Discord server and keep an eye on that. It'll be in one of the contest channels. And you can always ask us, because we do linger in that Discord server. So we'd be happy to share all that with you.
That made it sound kind of like a fart in a small room. We linger. We persist in the cracks and crevices. Should we go ahead and start the music for the trivia? I'll give it a lead up a couple minutes. So basically, my childhood was fairly uneventful. Oh, sorry. So, okay, on to trivia. I am looking at my bank account, and this is interesting. Nobody wants to win this week, so I guess we'll just do regular trivia. We'll go with the format of sorts where the winner gets to pick the category. Once again, we're going to go with 3 categories. The categories are, this is going to blow you away, icons, quotes, and things in the picture. Let's go ahead and have Vase. Why don't you go ahead and give me a category?
Yes. I'll go for this is going to blow you away icons for 100, please.
Okay. And now some of these I might have done before, so my apologies for my senility. Treasure Hunter. You get a intellect icon at the end of the upkeep phase. You must either pay a resource or discard Treasure Hunter. Can you tell me what icon or icons are on this card?
1 intellect icon.
Okay, you can't just Google the card.
I forgot that was a card. I'm like, is he talking about Relic Hunter?
No, Treasure Hunter. Same thing was spelled and said differently. All right, Nate, 1 point. Good job. You get to pick the next category. Oh, no, wait. We have a surprise another person who's joining us.
Loki said intellect. He keeps saying intellect, so I get a point.
Why do you got to cheat? All right. Next, you were saying what category?
I will take quotes for 200.
All right. And once again, I literally don't know if I just did these last time. So, Loki's correct. This one is the new Arkham Horror card called. Good job. All right. Point to Loki on that. Oh, speaking of which, I guess segueing back to our conversation of new content, Arkham Horror is imminent. We placed our official numbers for content, and we bulked up. I think that's going to do well. Plus, we're going into the holiday season, so
We'll also be giving away a copy of that too at some point, because I ordered an extra copy by accident.
Save me 2 copies, Nathan, because my game store closed.
I will. Oh no! I will do my best. Okay, so going on to the next question. Once again, we have Nate at 1 point. Here we go. How do you know I'm mad? Said Alice. You must be, said the cat, or you wouldn't have come here. What card is that for?
Grim Fairy Tales.
Is that a... Oh, that is a card, but no, it's not.
Stranger Than Fiction?
Anybody else want to guess?
Damn it.
Alice Luxley.
Ooh, nice. My hat's off to you.
The Black
Madly.
Cat?
Nate was the closest. He just screwed the pooch on the title. Truth from Fiction.
Ah.
Good try. But since you had the
I knew
last
exactly
one,
what card you were talking about.
no,
too.
you
It's
didn't because you said a different name. So, Nate, if you want to go ahead and give us another category.
Oh man, I can even picture the card in my head.
Yeah, that's
too.
great. Yeah.
Let's do a picture
Picture
for 200.
for 200. Now this is a fun one. We're going into the a new category of sorts. I'm picking 2 of the cats that you get. What's it, Mr. Tomlin? Whisker. I can't remember the name of the main cat. You bring out the cat and you get the allies.
That's Miss, not Mr. Miss Doyle.
I'm sorry, I got a glass of water just a little bit ago, so I. Two of the cards, Augur and Hope, both have the same vegetable.
It's a pumpkin?
It is a pumpkin. Look at you. It's actually really cool art. Great for the holiday season coming up here in October. Good job. Another point
I
for
smell
Nate.
a rat.
It also helps that I have the art sitting on my wall.
Exactly. I smell a rat with
Vase,
that one.
I'm going to have to ask you to go ahead and step aside and watch your whore mouth. All right. Nate, go ahead and pick the next category.
Let's see. We've done all 3 categories now. Let's circle back to
8. We still have 8 chances. Okay. He's only got 2 points.
Let's circle back to icons.
Icons. All right.
I thought this is going to blow your mind, icons. Was the name of the category.
Okay. So then here we go. Can anyone tell me the icons that are on Zoe's cross?
Combat, willpower, and wild.
I believe it's 2 combat and a wild icon.
Man from Lane?
I said combat and wild.
Okay. Close. Unfortunately, Nate apparently is just Googling everything because he did, in fact, get combat, and wild for 3 points.
Man, you guys are getting crushed.
Is that up on your wall?
No, it is not.
Okay.
You're lucky, Nate. Remember that one time a long time ago when I said that my brain wasn't working this morning?
That long time
A
ago.
long time ago? That was like an hour and a half ago.
Picture. All right. Back to Nate.
Let's do picture.
Picture. Key of Yeast. In addition to the wonderful marble stone slab and the key itself, what else is in the picture?
Oh, well, the Key of Yeast is about, the story is about a flooding, so it's going to have to be water or shore.
Okay. So we have water or a shore. Anybody else?
A key.
Blood?
That's so random, Nate. But he's going to get it because he's been cheating.
By getting it, missing it, if that's what you mean, then he has, in fact, missed it. The answer is 2 lit candles. There are 2 lit candles on either side of the Key of Yeast, or Yees. Next one. We're down to 6. Once again, if you can get 4 of these things, Man from Lang or Base, you could dethrone Mr. Saucy Pants.
Ooh. I don't know if I want to be saucy pants. That
Quote
sounds
it
like
is. Here we go. Seek clarity in your heart and mind.
Clarity of mind.
You know what? That would have been a great quote for that card.
That would have been hilarious.
That would have been really good.
Moment of respite. Respite.
Oh, also
How
a
do you
good
say that?
guess.
Respite?
Anybody else? Seek clarity in your heart and mind. It was, in fact, the 4 of Cups, aka Chalice of the Heart. Bonus point if someone can tell me the icon on this one.
None.
There is no icon.
Boom, Vase. Although Man from Lang, very, very close. That was a trick question.
Take that, Nate.
Okay, yeah, you're schooling them now. All right. All right, so we have
But there's no pudding
picture.
in the meat to pudding.
We've got the picture, we've got icon, and we've got quote. Vase, what do you want to go with?
I will go with the things in the picture.
Things in the picture. Okay, your favorite mind, swift reflexes. What is the person holding in their hands?
2 guns.
That is correct. Vase. That was quick.
Pow! Nate, 2 guns to your face.
What?
Okay, we don't need
Like
to.
that,
We
Nate.
don't need to. This is 2020. We don't need to actively put guns in people's faces. Vase,
It's not people, it's Nate.
pick
And
the next category.
I will go with icons.
Icons of the realms. Once upon a time, there was a hollowed mirror. Upon the hollowed mirror, there were soothing melodies Can someone tell me the icons on
Willpower.
a soothing
One
melody?
willpower, one combat, and one agility icon.
Correct.
On Soothing
Nate.
Melody? What?
Yeah, that was pretty sick.
Yeah, dog.
How did you know that name?
Yeah, please explain.
Because I played the card yesterday.
You know,
That would
That's
add
fair.
to the answers if he knows it. Okay.
it's a good way to know.
Nate, go ahead and pick the next category.
Let's do quotes again.
Quotes. Excellent choice. You knew you shouldn't have borrowed money from the O'Bannon gang. It seems like they're always looking to collect at the worst times.
Hospital debts?
Hospital debts, not correct. Anybody else?
Mob enforcer?
Correct. Nate.
Ah, yes.
Damn.
That's pretty impressive. Nate, you get to pick the next category. We've got pictures, icons, or quotes.
Let's do icons.
Icons. We're actually out of those cards. -1 point. You're down to 4.
Yes.
Nate, you get to go pick the next category.
Let's do picture.
We're out of pictures too. Down 1 point. You're down to 3.
Oh my
Damn.
god. Quotes it is.
It's a tight
Quotes.
race.
All right, here we go. Here's the quote. Told you.
Oh my god.
Wait, you already told us?
No, the name of
That's
the
the
quote,
quote.
is told
It's
you.
Oh my god. I know.
Oh.
I know this card.
Do you? Because you're not saying it.
Told you. It's gotta be a Mark card because he's the soldier. What's that? Shock something.
One could argue it's a pretty new
Shell shock.
card.
I'm going to say anything you can do better.
Perfect. Man from Lang. Nailing it.
I knew it was a rogue
I
card.
somehow knew you were going to get that too, Man from Lang. Man from Lang, I'll let you pick the category.
Is it quotes or things in the art?
You can't stop this man. He's observant. Correct. We have another quote card here. I'm not going to tell you the name of the card. What I'm going to tell you is the quote. Here we go. Are you sure you want to know? There is no going back.
Astounding revelation.
No, that card has way too much text on it to have flavor text.
That's what I was gonna say. You finished my sentence for me.
Yeah, okay.
Would
I was
anyone
gonna say astounding revelation.
would
is
anyone
not
like a
because it has-
hint?
Sure.
Think chess.
Deja vu?
Is that what you think of when you think of chess?
Quick learner?
It has chess pieces on it.
Oh, that's true, I guess. Think of
Mr. Rook.
There you go. Mr.
Boom.
Rook is correct. Was that Vase?
Chess Rook. That was Vase.
Fantastic. All right. So Vase at 3, Nate at 3. Sorry, Nate. Man from Lang at 1. Let's go ahead and have a tiebreaker.
Dealer's choice.
I'm thinking. No, this will be easier. I'm thinking of a type of liquid. Who can tell me what I'm thinking of?
Tennessee Sour Mash?
Courage. Liquid courage.
Water.
Correct.
Yes.
Nate with the water. Good job. Well, I mean, I also took 2 points away from you from the bullshit. You didn't know what I was out of categories. So it's only fair. It's only fair that you won that. Good job, everybody. I realize that my trivia is not easy. And I literally pick the cards as I have my headphones on and you're all talking. So good job, everybody.
So wait, if you're picking cards as we're doing, how did you run out of cards?
No, as in like an hour ago when we started.
Oh.
Not as I'm asking the questions. Yeah. So, yeah. Great. So glad we
Man,
did this.
I'm what am I, like reigning champ now? Like 3 times in a row?
We've established that.
ish.
Kingdom Hearts, all that.
Oh yeah, we did establish that. I forgot that that's public knowledge now. Certainly an interesting episode. I'm curious to see what what our listeners will think about our thoughts about the game thus far and what we're excited for coming up. I am a little apprehensive towards Innsmouth, but I am still excited to see what the game has to offer, and Barkham is going to be great fun.
Oh, also, sorry, just real quick. If any of our listeners want to send us a picture of yourselves with the Innsmouth Conspiracy box eating fish and chips, you can send that to Carolyn Fern, the botanist, for a guaranteed prize from Vase.
I am not familiar with this contest.
I will make sure that if you send us a picture eating fish and chips with the Innsmouth Conspiracy box, I will make sure Vase sends you something.
Perfect. Don't forget Discord. Join our Discord for the announcement of the Scavenger Hunt.
To clarify, you do not need to have tartar sauce or lemon featured in the picture, but that will help ensure that it is a full flavored picture. Thank you very much.
I would consider those mandatory. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. I have been your host, Nate, lost in time and space. And as always, I was joined with...
I am the man from Lang, host of the Whisper in Darkness YouTube channel.
I am Innkeeper of Vase, Odin from the Twisted Tentacle. And hold on, tartar sauce is a requirement for fish and chips?
Absolutely.
As opposed to tartar sauce.
Right up there with malt vinegar.
Malt vinegar.
Tartar sauce would
tartar
be
sauce.
larger on the inside. This has been Nathan from Guardian Games / Arkham Horror Images of Madness on Instagram and all those other cracks and crevices apparently in our Discord.
Or something.
You know what? Okay, this is my bit. You shut your mouth. I am so
I
sorry.
would also accept remoulade. Remoulade is a...
Why are you focused on the fish and chips? I did it as an aside.
I like the remoulade too, but not the tartar.
All right.
You know what? I'm
let's
ending
move
this
on.
episode right
Move
now.
on.